Sorry for the cliffhanger, I ran out of time. So when two rulers have a claim to the throne, they have a rock paper scissors battle to determine who's going to be the king. Actually, instead, the two of them declared war on each other. Edward trying to claim the French throne and expand his lands to expand England to the entirety of France, and Charles trying to prevent that from happening. So what happens is the English completely dominating the French for the first 100 years of the war. Also, during the 100 Years' War, it's not 115 or 16 years of continuous fighting. There are several phases of it, and there were actually instances of decades where no major events really happen. And the English defeat the French for various reasons, one of which is the French always get too cocky. At all of their major defeats, the French always outnumber the English, so they charge headfirst at them, and the English have technology that can counter this, such as the longbow. So the English conquers the country of Wales. It's that weird little nub on the west side of England, and the Welsh have a bow called the longbow. It's about 5 to 6 feet long. It has a very high draw strength. It can shoot farther. It can shoot faster. More importantly, it can penetrate some armors. So you can have peasants that can actually take out armored knights and armored heavy infantry. The English also at the Battle of Crecy, for example, bring in early rudimentary cannons. These aren't actual cannons that we think of even later on, like during the Renaissance and the Napoleonic era. These are just rudimentary metal tubes, sometimes on wheels, that you would fill full of stuff and then you would shoot it. And it was mostly used for a fear tactic as opposed to used to actually kill people. Also, the fact of, since the French were always on the ropes, they could never really mount an attack on the English homeland. Also because the French Navy was never that grand, and England normally had their crap together. And if my voice sounds kind of ragged, it's because I was at the 13-minute mark on my last recording of this. I mispronounced a word, and I just screamed the F word because I'm a child. It happens. But eventually, with the 100 Years' War, the French, some would claim, get divine intervention. So there's this 15-year-old girl just doing 15-year-old girl things, such as gardening in her family's private plot, and she gets visited by Michael, the archangel. Remember, there's two archangels in the Bible that are named by name. One of them is Gabriel, who's the happy-go-lucky one. And then you have Michael with his trumpet and flaming sword. And Michael says, "You will go and help the French get back the throne." Don't know why the angel sounds like a rip-off John F. Kennedy. It is what it is. And Joan answers, "Okay." And so Joan goes to her feudal lord. And just says, "Hey, an angel spoke to me and said I need to lead the troops in battle." And the feudal lord goes, "All right, we have nothing to do. We have nothing to lose." He talks to the king, and the king's like, "I got nothing to lose." And so the first thing the feudal lord tells Joan is, "Look, we've been besieging the city for a while now. Go capture Orleans." And Joan goes to Orleans, and she captures it. And pretty much no matter where Joan goes, she wins. And because she wins, people, gain hope. And later on, the British capture Joan. She's betrayed. And they try her for heresy, for the crime of wearing pants. What they actually wanted to get her for, they just wanted to kill her to try to, demoralize the French. What they actually got her on was she was wearing pants, which was considered cross-dressing, which was a sin, therefore heretical. She wore pants in prison so she wouldn't get raped. And the British burnt her at the stake for it. And then later on, the French rallied behind the imagery of Joan and view her as a national hero, and then they kicked the British out of France. And much like a NASCAR race, the British learned that you have to finish out strong. But the 100 Years' War is a very important event because it goes through a lot of European history. The Black Death happens during the 100 Years' War. The advent of gunpowder and warfare happens during the 100 Years' War. You don't have musketeers yet, but you do have rudimentary firearms. But swords and horses still take precedence over firearms because they're very unreliable. The English cut ties with their French identity and the French ideals because they're at war for like 100 and so years. I can't do the math, deal with it. But the English stopped speaking French. They stopped importing French wine. They wear English clothing. They teach at their universities in English. And also, you have the advent of mercenaries in Western Europe. Mercenaries are just soldiers that fight for money and nothing else. Beforehand, you'd have to use your feudal levies. Your feudal levies being the countrymen who either own the land or own the people who worked on the land. And if you use your feudal levies, not only are they not available for the harvest season, if they die, then you lose production. All right, so back to France. We're going back in time. So Charlemagne's dynasty dies and replaced by the Capetians. The Capetians are founded by Hugh Capet. Hugh Capet is the king of France, and all you need to know is that he solidifies rule in France, and he builds a city on an island in the middle of a river, and he calls it Paris. It's just that. Just that's what you need to know about the Capetians. They are more important than that, but since we are a country founded by the English, you need to learn more about England than France. Sue me, I don't care. I have litigation insurance. So let's go to Spain. So it's an interesting location. It was a Roman province. It fell to the Visigoths. The Visigoths fell to the Muslims. And the Muslims and the Catholics are at war with each other for a long, long time. Eventually, the Catholics do set up their own kingdoms. The three main important ones are Castile, Leon, and Aragon. And Aragon falls out of pretty much contention for power, and you're left with. My bad. I'm sorry. Leon falls out of contention with power, and you're just left with Aragon and Castile. And the Spanish focus at the time is known as the Reconquista or the Reconquering. They want to conquer the entire peninsula back from the Muslims. Portugal's also there, but Portugal never really does anything. Portugal rises to power in the 14 and 1500s due to their navy and their trading. They get really, really rich because they have like a rich prince that's just like, what if I like just sailed boats everywhere? And he settles colonies in Africa. But later on in Spain, in the 15th century, there's a man by the name of Ferdinand. He's the king of Aragon. And there's a lady by the name of Isabella. She's the queen of Castile. And they're like, hey, like, I'm single. You're single. I have a kingdom. You have a kingdom. Let's get hitched. So Ferdinand and Isabella get married, and they become co-monarchs of their kingdoms, and they combine them. And with their combined power, they're able to expel the Moors from Spain. Not only do they expel Moorish leadership from Spain, at the end of the Reconquista, they also expelled all the non-Christians. So they kick all the Muslims and all the Jews out of Spain, many of which go into hiding. And because they're no longer dealing with the threat of the Muslim invasion, they can focus their attention on other things such as exploration. The age of exploration is kicking off mostly due to an increase in technology and the peak in European interest of Henry, Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal, being able to sail to Africa and eventually around Africa when it gets to Vasco da Gama of Portugal. But they want to find a way to sail from Europe to China. There's an Italian man by the name of Christopher Columbus. You may have heard of him. He goes to several kingdoms just like, look, I know how to get to China. And it's just a straight line. And they all tell him to screw off. And then he goes to Ferdinand and Isabella's just like, look, give me some money for some boats. I want to go to India. And they're like, okay. And so he sails for 3 weeks, which is what he calculates the distance to India. And he winds up in India, which is located in the Dominican Republic. And since he's in India, he calls the people Indians. Yeah, it's kind of messed up. That's why they're called Indians. But I'm legitimately sure that you know this. But Spain gets a jump start on the New World. Later on, they compete with the Portuguese. They have to sign the Treaty of Tordesillas. But the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Pope draws a line on a map saying that the Portuguese can settle east of that line. The Spanish get all that's west. So the Portuguese only wind up with Brazil, but they do get bigger gains in India. But with the New World, the Spanish get lots of money because the New World is chock full of gold and gems and all sorts of fancy things, and they conquer it. Then everybody else wants to conquer it. Later on, the English are just like, what if we settled a camp in the swamp, and then we get Jamestown, and then they all die and each other. But eventually, Ferdinand and Isabella die, and there is an Austrian dude by the name of Charles, and Charles V is the king of the Holy Roman Empire. And so Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, which is just a confederation of German states, it's what East Francia turns into. He marries the Queen of Spain, and due to inheritance laws, he becomes the ruler of not only the Holy Roman Empire, but he also is king of Spain. And you know that really, really funny looking guy that's really inbred? Well, yeah, that's his great-great-grandfather or something like that. He's a Habsburg. He's only slightly inbred. It's not that bad, guys. And then I'm just going to keep talking until time runs out. Let's talk about Russia. So, Russia is not like what it is today. It is not this huge pan-continent empire. What Russia starts off as is various kingdoms or duchies settled whose base of power would be the main city. So you'd have the Duchy of Kiev, the Duchy of Novgorod, the Duchy of Muscova, so on and so forth. But in the 13th century, these people from Mongolia, let's call them Mongolians, make their way across from Mongolia, and they conquer the Russians, and Russia is controlled by a people known as the Golden Horde. That's just the European wing of the Mongol Empire. And the Golden Horde controls Russia, but they keep, even though the Mongolians have the true power, they keep the local leaders there just to help ease the control. That way people don't always be hostile to them. But eventually the Mongolians, like every empire, after a couple bad leaders, the empire gets severely weakened. And because of that, certain people are able to gain power, one of which is Ivan of Moscow. So, Ivan of Moscow, let me see, hold on one second. Oh, God. Sorry about that, I had to check to see what Ivan was. Ivan III, or the Grand Prince of Moscow, is able to consolidate power in his city, and he's able to fight back against the Mongols. And after he kicks the Mongols out, he turns his attention to the other city-states, and he starts conquering them, and he forms what eventually does become Russia. And Ivan III lives during a very interesting time, because during this time, several things are happening. One of which is the fall of Constantinople. So, in 1453, Constantinople is conquered by the Ottoman Empire, and what happens is, since it's conquered by the Ottomans and they're Muslim, a lot of the power of the Orthodox Church goes to Russian cities. And with Moscow being the most influential city, the Patriarch of Moscow becomes the most influential church leader, and Ivan is pretty much able to pick the church leaders and thereby can control the church, which makes it a very easy time for him to control the country. He becomes the first czar, it means Caesar, and the Orthodox Church influenced unification. Not really sure how much time I have, so I'm just going to wrap this up now. Bye.